Hello everyone and good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, which topic is to focus on user interface of SCIA Engineer. My name is Vladimir and I'm here together with my colleague Daniel, and we are going to guide you through this webinar. So during the webinar, just for a little housekeeping, during the webinar, you are muted. You cannot ask your questions directly, but you can use the questions box. And sometimes I will also ask you for your feedback on some ideas. So please feel free to write it into the chat box. We are going to get to your responses either during this webinar or right after its end. Also be informed that this webinar is recorded and it will be available on YouTube for future viewing. So what we are going to cover in this webinar, we are going to have a look in a comprehensive way on all the aspects of the user interface of SCIA Engineer. We are going to have an overview of the environment, and through the description of separate components, we are going to tackle, for example, what are features that might have slipped your attention. Are there some hidden features that might actually help you out? We are going to have a look at what is customizable in the new UI and what is not. How can you use workflows that are a bit remade in the UI with, for example, complex selections? We'll have a look at marking menu and tips on quick modeling. And also we are going to have a look at table input and table results component. Before we continue any further, I would actually like to ask you, in order to make this a little bit more interactive. So I would like to ask you what experience do you have with the user interface of SCIA Engineer? And I have here a couple of options. For example, if you are using the new interface already, that's great. And I hope that you are going to find some useful tips to even increase your productivity. Of course, portion of you might not actually have the chance to try out the new interface, or they try it and shift it back for various reasons. Please let us know also in the questions. Should you feel you have a reason why you are not using the new interface at this moment, please let us know. I will now close the voting, and I will also share with you what we have learned. So biggest answer is yes, that you are using, and indeed that's great. And for those that the second most voted option is that you switched actually back to the old UI. I hope that in this presentation and also in the future development, we are going to persuade you that the new UI is the option. So let's continue with our presentation. So the new user interface, or I will just call it user interface of SCIA Engineer that we currently have, is apparent on this print screen. There are multiple different pieces of the user interface, and we are going to cover them block by block today. And I will also show you in the program some other tips. So just to make the naming of the parts clear. So the main menu is on the top left. We have SCIA Spotlight on the middle of the top bar, and there is also some search results of the command line or search line. We have the status bar to do various things regarding the general setting, for example, of snapping or some other like national annexes. We are going to get to that as well. Of course, we have the properties panel, which shows the properties of different types of entities, and in the interactive way, you can either use it to really manipulate the selection to select more elements with similar properties, or really to change the properties of different members. We also have the NaviCube. There is nothing shocking about that, I hope. And around it, actually, there is a view bar. And view bar here is used to gather commands that actually manipulate not what you can see, but how you can see it in the 3D scene. So for example, to switch from parametric perspective to isometric view, or to enable volumes or rendering and different additional data. We also have the input panel, which is used to to host input commands of various sorts. And on the bottom left corner, we have a toolbar that we call process toolbar, and there are also separate list of features or list of commands that you can use in your daily work. We also have the context menu, of course. It's very simple to reach. You just right-click your mouse, and there is a menu with some additional commands. And something that's quite new to the interface is that we actually now provide a way how to do inbuilt tutorials, how to get those of you that might have not tried the new UI before, because of maybe the time restraints, how to actually follow a tutorial that will actually guide you through using the interface with interactive way. It's not everything that we do have. We have some other components that can appear on demand, and we are also going to have a look at those today. To be specific, those are the table input and table results for managing the structural data or all the data of the model, and also to investigate results in quite interactive way. And we also do have the report preview component, which shows the tables and other data as they would be inputted in the engineering report. We are going to have a look at all these components just in a bit. So let me start with some general rule that the components do have. So in the interface of SCIA Engineer, you are free to use the components within the, let's say, canvas or within the application of SCIA Engineer, or you can move them out of the application. This actually applies to all the, let's say, rectangular components, such as the input table, results table, of course, the preview, or even the properties panel and input panel. The other components like navicube or view bar, they cannot be moved to a different screen. But this way, if you are using two screens or more, you can have really the focus on your project on one of the screen, and having all the tools not blocking your view, you can have them on the different monitor. You can, of course, if you are, for example, using single screen, as I am doing actually now, you can actually minimize components when not needed. You just can click on the header of the component or its name, like input panel here, or the results table. And if you do, the components will actually be shrink to only a small strip. But if you click on it again, it also is shown right away. So this is quite general behavior of the components. And let me start with something that might be, that's actually something interesting, and we are also planning to enhance it a little bit in the future, and that's the inbuilt system for tutorials. So once you actually install the version for the first time, but you also can launch these tutorials anytime later, a specific set of onboarding tooltips are going to be shown to you. And these tooltips will actually guide you through a workflow, a simple one, of course, because it's a tutorial to get you onboarded, but it will explain the possibilities of different components. And so you can get familiar with SCIA Engineer without actually reaching for YouTube or reading some lengthy PDF files. A lot of resources is still available, but we feel that with this interactive tutorial, the onboarding should be made at least a little bit easier. So even if you are a new user or if you haven't used SCIA Engineer before, or your colleagues, perhaps, or new colleagues that haven't used SCIA Engineer at all, you can get familiar with the software in minutes. And in the previous time, actually, there was needed a demo or a more senior colleague to help with the first steps. We believe that these tutorials actually help to mitigate this. Basically, besides the general onboarding tutorial, which explains the UI, we are constantly working on increasing the amount of tutorials available. So in version 21, there is the basic onboarding tutorial, but also tutorials dedicated to steel or concrete that are tailored made to if you are a steel user, you should have a look at the steel tutorial if you want to get started with SCIA Engineer. Now let's get to the other components, and I will do it, let's say, in a clockwise orientation. So let's start with the main menu. It's also quite simple. So it contains a lot of functions. Yeah, there are of course a set of icons that we now have, and the interesting part about it is that, and this is actually something that we try to make really common throughout multiple components. If there is a hotkey that you can assign and that you can use, you do that in the right side of the list of commands, and it's actually very simple. You can just click on the current hotkey and change it. And we also support single letter hotkeys. I actually like to use those quite a bit, and I will show you the most convenient places where you can have them. In the interactive way, if you, for example, want to add to your toolbar commands, you can just simply drag them, and it's actually something that's not that common. But once you drag it, you will agree with me that it is very simple, and maybe not. You might not be aware on the first glimpse because that's something that is not common for other software packages. But this is something that allows the configuration to suit your needs. Next in the top bar is the Spotlight, and this one actually looks like an ordinary command line, but has some major advantages that I'm going to cover. First, you don't need to be exact, well, to certain level when using the Spotlight. You just start writing word, and there is the autofill function, and also the full text search. So if you are, for example, looking for hinges or anything really, and if you know at least how a part of the command is called, you are able to get very quickly to the command that you are searching for, that you want to use. Of course, with the SCIA Spotlight and the search results, exactly the same as with the menu applies. So it shows icons and hotkeys. You can change the hotkeys if you want, and you can also drag the commands that you found. If, for example, you are using some commands often and you found it through a Spotlight, you can drag it to your toolbar for future use, or you can assign a hotkey. Similar to the menu is the status bar, and the status bar is located on the top right of the canvas, and it is used for some more, let's say, practical settings. For example, I think one of the most important is switching between load cases, and also, for example, snapping or working with the user coordinate system. And here you can see that it actually looks a little bit similar to the menu, but it's also a little bit different because we also included actually like multiple commands on a single line. So whenever there is, let's say, additional settings to a command, it is identified by this icon. And you will find a lot of these icons throughout the software, and it always means the same thing. There is some additional settings, something that you can reach directly from the place you want. You can run the command. You don't need to search for these tools. Of course, there are some other features like possibility of result locking or enabling the auto refresh, and there is also place for codes annexes. And in version 21.1, in the most recent patches, there is also going to be the management of licenses. So stay tuned for that one. Next in the line is actually the process toolbar. And this one is a component that's fully customizable. It, of course, contains actually multiple toolbars in the same spot, but you also always can view two of them simultaneously. So you can open two of them. Some of the buttons on the toolbars can actually hide multiple different commands. We call those stacks, or you can call them sub panels. And you can interact with this toolbar very simply. I mentioned already that if you want to add a command to it, you just drag it there. Same if you want to move a command to a different toolbar, or even populate it again, or if some commands are not to your liking, you can just remove them. You can always return to the default settings should you make too much adjustments. So there is a command to restore the user configuration of all these custom settings. Very similar to the concept of the properties in the old UI. We have the properties panel, and there are some highlights that I would like to show you. And the first one is that the properties panel now shows associated data. So imagine that if you, for example, select a beam, and the beam has hinges on them, or some loads, you will actually see and be able to interact with the properties of these secondary or associated data directly in the properties panel. So imagine that what might have been clumsy in the old UI. Imagine that you would like to select all the beams and change their hinges, for example. Now you just can select the beams and edit the hinges where you are. You don't need to really go to even see the hinges in the 3D scene. I will show you in a few moments how that actually works. Of course, the properties panel, as the name implies, it contains all the properties, illustrations, action buttons. And one of the most important features that might be not that simple to find for you, because in the old UI it was not, is that on right click of your mouse, you actually are able to see a specific submenu or specific context menu, which allows you to actually work with the selection. So if you, for example, want to select all the beams with certain cross section, you just right click on the cross section and expand selection by all the selection with this property. The same applies the other way around. So if you would, for example, like to isolate your selection, for example, you can select the whole structure and isolate only on two different cross sections. You can do that with the same approach. The input panel is the next component, and it's really contains tools to create anything that is then visible in the 3D scene. So there are actually list of commands that you launch to create, for example, structural entities like members or plates, and etc. It is sorted in workstations that follows the logic of structural engineering workflow. So you start with the structure defining 1D and 2D members. Then you switch to loads or apply some masses, etc. So this is possible via the input panel. Of course, SCIA Engineer has a lot of different features or a lot of different commands hidden or organized in this input panel. So you can use the filters for different categories or tags. So there is possibility of actually showing only a subset of the commands. For example, myself, I use the tag basic modeling because from my perspective, it actually contains most used commands, and it looks much lighter, this input panel. I will show you how that looks in a real product. So you can work with all the tools or just with the most common ones. And there is also the dual mode of display. So you can see here there is one mode. So you can display the commands as a as basically you would in the main menu. So you see the icon, you see the name, there is also the hotkey. So it looks similar to the other components. But in this case, it actually takes quite some space. So I think it's great to actually learn how the icons for different commands look like. And once you get familiar with them, you can actually switch to the icon mode only, which is providing a more compact view and no need of scrolling too much. One of the last basic components is the view bar. And as I mentioned before, it's used for the view management. So you can manage the angle, for example, using the Navicube, but you can also change settings of what is rendered, whether you want to draw your supports loads, labels for nodes, labels for elements, etc. There is multiple of the most used features. And for example, for the additional settings of visible load cases, you can just pick a load case you want to see and it is displayed. Let's now have a look at some of these aspects live in SCIA Engineer. So here I have a very simplistic project, but I use it in order to make everything clear. So for example, if I would like to input a beam, let's say an additional beam, I have multiple options. Either I can input it directly from using the input panel, or I am also able, if I just press space key, that's the, for example, hotkey for the Spotlight, I can just write BE, and you can see that the full text search actually searches for the most viable options. If I'm using beam command often, it might be practical for me to assign hotkey. And you can see it that I actually did it pretty simply. You just need to click on this space at the end and you just assign hotkey. We also think that using the single letter hotkeys is actually very convenient. And I greatly encourage you to try it out, because then you can also be quite faster and have more different options. Of course, you can see that hotkeys using like Control plus B or Alt or Shift, they still do work as well, but this is the option that might be in some cases most handy. Where I'm using these single letter hotkeys the most is, for example, for launching input table, I have I, for results table, I have R, and for report preview, I have P. These I find most interesting because I really open these components quite frequently. If you do as well, you can think about whether it would be just easy enough for you to assign hotkey. Again, you can just assign, for example, Control I. I mentioned that the customizability is not only about the hotkeys. If you are not a fan of hotkeys, or you just feel that there is too many commands here, you can just drag things and assign it to a toolbar. Let me show you. I just drag with my mouse and I am able to place the command here on top of my toolbar. If I want to place it anywhere else, I just move it this way, or I can move it to different panel. And if I get tired of this command, or I'm not using it anymore, or there are some other commands that I'm not using, I just place it into the trash can. This works with the commands also from different menus, like here from the main menu. I can just drop it in there, or also, for example, from the status bar. Let me now get a little bit to a different topic, and I think that's actually one very important one, and that's what I already mentioned. That's the working with the selections. So even in this small or relatively small structure, I could have the need of selecting, for example, all the roof bracings, and Yeah, there are of course multiple options. I can go, for example, like this and go on and select then my mouse, but that's very painful and not really productive. So in this case, I think very important to mention is the way how this can be automated. And there is a specific workflow how you can actually select all of them. I mentioned it already in the presentation. If I just right click on the cross section, I can expand the selection and right away all the beams with this cross section are selected. But that's not all, because here I clicked on the properties of the current beam. But I can also, for example, have some beams with other circular hollow core section, and I can, for example, expand the selection by also clicking on different types of cross sections here in my list. So this way you can see I very quickly selected all the beams that actually have either of any of these three cross sections. What I mentioned also before is that now if I have my beams selected, I can actually go to hinges because you don't even see hinges on these beams. But I can assure you there are hinges on them, and even though I can't see them, I'm able to go on and interact with their settings because the hinges are direct reference to the beams. So are, for example, layers, cross sections, beam nonlinearities, or you can imagine a lot of different data. This works in multiple ways, and let me show you a different use case. For example, I can do selection like this, very let's say rough. So you can see that I selected some nodes, I selected some load panels, members, all of different data. But imagine that I would now like only to delete the beam nonlinearities. What I can do is I can just right click on the group and I can isolate selection. And you can see that at this point in time, only the beam nonlinearities remained in the selection. I can hit my delete button and delete these data. Very similar approach is also, yeah, we are here actually working with sets, correct? So if I want to, for example, unselect the nodes, I just subtract them from selection. I can do that also for the load panels. Alternatively, I can just drag this, for example, if I want to deselect supports, I can just drag them into the trash can here. You need to understand that this trash can is not deleting the data. It's just removing them from the selection. So there are multiple ways how you can manipulate with the selection to really get the correct selection in order to get the workflow or the amount of beams or other elements that you want to, for example, move or delete or otherwise modify. There is one linked feature to that, and let me show that to you real quick. I will first run my calculation. You can see that running calculation is done by this middle button, so it's maybe most convenient. And let me, for example, show the node displacement on this structure. So now I see some results, and you can see that the results in the properties panel actually behaves pretty similarly to any other selected object. So if you see a result visible in the 3D scene or in the properties panel, it is, let's say, selected. So if you want to unselect it or if you want to hide it, the same applies. You just drag it in out of the selection, and that's what you need to do. We also plan to do something a little bit additional to hiding and showing results in a simple way, but you will need to wait for the future releases. For this, these features that I've shown already, I think that I shown what I wanted, and I still have quite a bit more to to show. So let me continue with few additional features that we have developed quite recently. One of them in version 21.1 is what we call the marking menu, and it is really like invisible helper that you didn't see me actually showing that yet, but it actually allows very rapid modeling, and I am interested what you think about it, and so let me know afterwards. So if you are holding your Alt key and right mouse button, you are able to launch a menu that's visible only as long as the right mouse button key is held. And this actually allows quite productive modeling with option that I will show you also in a minute. And that's actually skipping the input dialogues. Currently, the marking menu is rigidly populated by features because we want to have it populated in a way that if you learn it, you can actually launch this command in a fraction of a second. And I will show you how that works. So if you press anywhere in the space the Alt or hold the Alt and right mouse button, you can see that such menu that's quite circle in approach, that it appears on your screen. And you can just run the command by pointing in different directions. So here I pointed in the direction of beams. I don't need to exactly press on the button. It's just the direction that runs the command, and it is actually getting real fast. Let me show you on a different project how fast you can model using this tool. So generally, if you start, for example, modeling a member, you have this dialog showing up. One of the important features that we do have, and I encourage you to try it out, is in the global UI settings, you can check bypass input dialog to always. And what happens now is you are able to model without seeing the input dialogs. You can also notice that in the properties panel on the right side of the screen, all the same aspects of or the same properties that you would see in the input dialog are actually shown. And here I'm creating just a very simple structure. I am launching mirror and multi-copy function, but I am doing that all from the marking menu. And you can see that once I actually know that, for example, modeling of member is the first item on the left in the bottom segment, if I just remember that very quickly after just a couple of uses, I'm able to do that very quickly. And one of the benefits I find, but really let me know what you think, is that I don't have to look on different corners of my screen to get these commands, because where my mouse is, my eyes are there too, and I am able to model even a little bit quicker by that. So yeah, here I was modeling just a couple of beams. Of course, you can see that there are different commands for example, creating beams, surfaces, load panels, and etc. And also the basic tools for editing of the structure. So you can see that it is containing, let's say, the most basic features, but also we know that the most basic features are the features being used the most. So now I also can create, for example, the surface load, and you can see that I did all these things without even seeing the input dialog. So if I want to assign supports, I can just do that, and even though they are quite small in this rendering, I'm able to assign them very quickly. Very much same with the hinges. So this was the marking menu that I wanted to show you. And there are also other features, other components that I mentioned in the first introduction of this webinar, but I would like to also show them into more depth to you. So the input and results table are tables that you can open when you need them. They are not opened by default because for most workflows with SCIA Engineer, they are not essential, but they can be run whenever you want from the tools menu. And the input table actually allows you to model flexibly and also copy paste data from and to Excel, for example. This is actually something quite interesting because it can actually enable you to do some sort of parametric modeling that I'm going to show you on also quite simple example. But even from simple example, I think you can see what benefit that can bring for repetitive or otherwise similar projects. So let's have a look at that. And I prepare here a simple Excel file that actually creates a similar like rotated building. This would be of course nightmare to model by hand. But if you know that there are certain rules between each story, like there are different angles between the stories, you are able to just launch the input table, and similar Excel spreadsheet can be set up in, like, for example, 20 minutes or something like that. But then you are just able to, if you are able to calculate position of nodes, and if you are able to define which nodes are connected and to form beams, you are just able to run very simple Control C and Control V from the Excel into the input table, and you can do all the different supported members. Here I just input the nodes, beams, 2D members, and openings. But you can see it took me quite a few seconds to just copy this in. So it's and structure of different types can be created or loaded this way. And now if I, for example, change an aspect of my model, I can just copy for example, the nodes, and if I change them, of course, as you would expect, the definition of the topology changes, so the structure is updated. This is very interesting for example, bridges, or I've also used it on different kind of projects, including, for example, the cooling towers, which are difficult to load by wind, for example, or to any similar buildings that has some, let's say, shape that you can describe using parameters in Excel. Besides table input, we have also table results, and this component is used in order to show different values of, for example, checks or results in a tabular form that allows, for example, filtering, hiding separate columns, sorting of the values. And for example, here you can see that I run the check for concrete data. You can see that I can actually filter or sort the values. And if I'm, for example, interested in some of the checks, I can, by just double clicking on the line, I am able to run a concrete check or steel check or any other check that is performed by means of the report preview. So you can see, you can very simply do that. Here I also demonstrate how to simply move those components, because of course the results table and the preview, they take considerable amount of space when shown like this. So you can move them on different monitor and interact with them there. Interesting aspect is that, of course, you can export the data to Excel, and for example, you are able, based on the sorted items, to have a look, for example, only on members that their utilization is maybe more, that their utilization is actually bigger than certain value. You can check these, and you can interact with those elements, adjust the reinforcement or some other member data to make them okay. This is the basic what I wanted to show about the new user interface that we have in the version 21.0 and 21.1. I would also like to ask you yet another question to get your feedback, what you liked, whether what you like about the workflows that I shown. Is it the working with the selection via the properties panel, or the customization of the UI, like assigning the hotkeys, and is it the table input and table results that you find most helpful, or how do you like the marking menu and the SCIA Spotlight? I'm interested in those because we are planning to do some improvements also for certain components. So if you find some of them very important or very interesting, we might actually have a look at them and improve them in very near future. So let me show you what is the outcome of the poll, because I think it's interesting, because the working with selection and properties and SCIA Spotlight are one of those most interesting features. And I can tell you that we are also trying to find a way how to improve these two. So it's for our future development that that we are going to have a look how to actually make the working with the selections more findable, because honestly I can imagine that some of you actually, even when that you are using the new user interface, but maybe you didn't know about these features. So we are going to make them more findable, perhaps also include or extend the onboarding tutorials by these features, and also some improvements in the SCIA Spotlight we also have in plan. These are the features that I wanted to show you in this webinar. I hope that you found the information that we shared with you today informative, and that that you found my presentation to be to at least appear a few features or few items that you didn't know. If you voted at the beginning of the webinar that you haven't used SCIA Engineer in the new UI yet because of lack of time or because of some of the features were missing, I hope that I managed to convince you that maybe it is time to have a look and give it a try. It is something that, with also the onboarding tutorial, it should be much simplified. And for those that are of you who are using the new UI, I also thank you for your attention, and I also hope that you were able to get something out of this webinar. Then thank you very much, and hear you in a different time in different webinar. Have a great rest of the afternoon.